So, Shub, last time in the last podcast, I think we got better about disagreeing. We had those two bonus questions at the end, and we got some nice feedback about those. So, we should probably pick up where we left off in that regard. So, today, topic sponsored by you, which when you brought it up, I really liked, is we're going to talk about small and medium sized businesses, SMBs, in construction and what construction technology can do with the SMBs in construction. So we've given this the headline. What is our thesis? Why construction SMBs are sleeping superpowers is the headline. And as always, we're going to have three segments with one question each that we're going to duel each other about. And I'd say, Shub, let's jump right into the first question.
Let's do it.
So, as always, I'm going to kick the first one over to you. And the question is, Shub, SMBs in construction, what excites you about that segment?
So, it's very interesting. One of the most exciting areas of investment in the last year or two, and a lot of very smart people have put in hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe even in the billions of dollars, in firms which are more or less digitizing SMBs in various use cases, in various industries, and in many parts of the world. Against this setting, what I find very unique about construction and construction SMBs in particular, so relative to many other industries, in construction, from some estimates that I last recall, around 90% of the output comes from SMBs, which, as you can imagine, is quite a staggering figure. And what I find, even to add a further level of nuance to this 90% number, for the construction industry in general, but more so in the case of SMBs serving the construction industry, so much of the output is blue collar in nature,
Hmm.
both the workers and the people involved, as well as the nature of the product or the service being offered. It's administered in a very manual, in a very blue collar effort kind of a way. And for better or worse, what this has led is to a lot of these firms having to sort of make do with paper-based methods, very traditional working methods. They've largely had to make do with manual ways of doing the work, coordinating with their suppliers, dealing with their stakeholders, building out relationships. All of this happens in a very, very manual way even today, and this applies, I would say, in varying degrees around the world, right? Regardless of whether it's a mature market or an emerging market. So to me, when I put on like a VC 101 hat or a hashtag VC logic mindset, as some of you might be familiar with that particular hashtag, I look at like a gigantic market of which a very vast proportion is taken up by a long tail of SMBs who have very little technology serving them. So I see the opportunity for massive disintermediation, massive brand creation, technology that serves a very large addressable market. And I think that's what gets me very, very excited about firms that serve small and medium businesses in construction.
Interesting. So, as always, I'm going to take this question, what excites me about construction SMBs, in a slightly different direction. And the other thing, as always, is you know your numbers approximately. I tend to come with accurate numbers, right? So
Aha.
maybe just to pick up on on the topic that you raised, how much of the value creation is done by SMB companies. So if you take, for example, the EU numbers, I'm going to share my screen here real quick because it might actually work. I hope. Shub, can you see my
There
screen?
you go. Yep.
Yeah, so this is an analysis that we've done at Fundamental, right? And it proves your point, right? So the way to read it is the turquoise bar is basically the number of companies. The yellow bar is the value added in the construction value added in the EU that those companies do. So what you
Mhm.
see is that 92% of the construction companies have less than 10 employees and they deliver 38% of the value. And
I see.
99.9% of the companies have less than 250 employees, deliver 80% of the value. Meaning enterprise construction companies make up 0.1% of the companies, delivering just 20% of the value. So that's what we're talking of in terms of in terms of fragmentation. So I'm going to take this in that direction, is first starting defining what is actually an SMB. And it starts with that chart, right? It's
Mhm.
basically saying, hey, an SMB probably starts at 250 or less employees. Everything above that is sort of enterprise-ish grade. So for those companies, also, a factor that you oftentimes see is that the owner, herself or himself, is still involved in the business. In many of
Mhm.
the SMBs in construction, you would find that. And involved means not just sitting in the back office and writing offers or writing invoices, that as well, actually,
Yep.
but also being out and about, being in customer acquisition, being in the execution of the projects, being involved in procurement, perhaps. So it's a very jack of all trades kind of structure where the owners, or sometimes it's the family of the owners who's involved in the business, actually gets to run the business in all aspects of the firm, right? And so that is something that also defines a lot what construction technology can deliver into construction SMBs, in my mind, because what you find is that these owner-led firms in construction SMBs are oftentimes, because they're a jack of all trades, strapped for time, right? So they sometimes write their offers at 7 p.m., 8 p.m., 10 p.m. in the evening. They write their invoices on the weekends, because everything in between is actually delivering projects, is
Mhm.
doing the procurement, all the operational side. Like you said, it's very blue collar execution of work, right?
Yep.
And so that's something that I've seen in construction technology firms serving the SMB segment that really excites me, is you get to create a lot of instant value with construction SMBs.
Mhm.
But that's also what you have to do. Typically, you have to show them that whatever solution or outcome you're selling them uh, is going to have an impact fairly instantly in the P&L of the SMB, because the owners, that's what they want to see. You don't get to sell them abstract value. You don't get to promise them, hey,
Yep.
just do 6 months of onboarding and another 6 months of data crunching, and then in 12 months you're going to find a bug in the P&L.
Yep.
That's not flying in construction SMBs, right? And
Yep.
that's something I find exciting for construction tech firms in our portfolio, is that the feedback cycle between actually offering a product and generating the outcome of the product as perceived by the customer is really, really low, which is vastly different to what you do with enterprises in construction tech. For me as a VC, that means I get to learn much, much faster also what kind of bets that we make are paying off faster and which ones not, because the feedback cycle is so low.
Yep. That's a pretty compelling reason to get excited as well, I would say.
Yeah, and I would say the other reason that I find exciting about construction SMBs is also tied to that, is the amount of frequency that you can generate with a solution serving the SMBs. Again, is also much higher. So that also means that obviously you get to participate in more transactions. You get to see more cycles of usage of your product, which in turn also should translate, if you're a great founder, into you
Yep.
improving your product, improving your go to market much, much faster. So that's something that I think, given the market structure of construction in most continents, is actually an advantage if you serve that segment of construction compared to enterprise.
Absolutely. Yep.
And I love how
How we
rigorously we're.
disagree, how vigorously we disagree.
Very much so. Yes. All right. Let's maybe take it to the second segment here, Shub, with the second question about construction SMBs. Maybe this is where we find real disagreement. So, what I want to ask you is, if you think about SMB enablement as
Mhm.
a topic for technology, as a topic for VCs that we see across sectors, right? Um, who do you think will win in construction for SMB enablement? The horizontal players, like let's say Brex, Spendesk, for accounting, for expense management, or do you think there will be verticalized solutions that are specific to construction that will dominate the construction sector for SMB enablement?
Yeah, this is quite a tricky one. So the more I think about it, I think when we talk about who could win, I think it boils down to what is unique to construction, especially when seen from the eyes of a small and medium business. So I think, for instance, some of the things which make construction unique and uniquely challenging as an industry for a small and medium business to be in just to recap again some of the points we've already made, so much of the output is blue collar in nature, and quite often it is both raw materials and services going hand in hand. And because of this, so much of the work, the output, how billing is done, how costs are measured, are also on a project or a sub project basis. It's not very well defined the way it might be in other industries with a higher white collar proportion. I think use cases or small and medium businesses which are very close or perfectly overlapping with all these unique aspects of construction, or some may even call them idiosyncrasies, in my opinion, those use cases demand not just merit but demand a vertical specific solution.
Hmm.
For instance, I would say you need a vertical specific solution to enable contractors, right, or to enable um, architects or craftsmen who combine products and services in the construction industry. For other kinds of SMBs, I would say it's a bit of a sliding scale. For instance, if your primary business as an SMB is, let's say, transportation or trucking, there could be a use case where you say, hey, we need a construction specific application. Or I could also imagine another version where the specialization is on the base of function, not so much industry.
Hmm.
For example, you could have a enablement solution focused across the trucking industry or across manufacturing, but cutting through different industries. Um, yeah, so I would say it's a bit of a mixed bag from me on how much we'll have vertical penetration here.
So I actually, my thesis is that for almost all of the functions in construction SMBs, I would expect a vertical solution to have a much better shot
Hmm.
of winning. And I think a lot of that has to do with what we've seen over the last, let's say, 15, 18 months in construction SMBs, that a lot of the workflows actually have a quite specific flavor to it that you wouldn't see in a second sector, right?
Hmm.
So let me give you an example. If and picking up on one that you used about the contractors, right? So if I'm an SMB contractor, one of the workflows that I'm having is writing quotes, then
Yeah.
actually getting some iterations on the quotes. When the quote is accepted, I need to do my takeoffs, right? So I basically need to calculate the volume the material quantities that I need to procure. Then I need to get offers for the for the cost of procuring those materials. Usually, I will, for most of the materials, I will have a go-to supplier or like three, four go-to suppliers, like distributors. I would know
Hmm.
roughly the prices, so I wouldn't get many um, surprises in the quotes, and then I procure and then I execute, and in the end I write an invoice. So that's the
Yeah.
workflow. In generically, if I'm on a horizontal, let's say CPQ platform that helps an SMB with writing the invoice and the subsequent steps,
Hmm.
it looks quite similar. But the devil is in the detail, right? So, for example, the way I write an offer, a quote, in construction contains a lot of specific elements. For example, about the volumes, how I quote the volumes, how I would do also the calculations based on sometimes whatever it could
Hmm.
be, square meters, it could be square feet,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of stuff that is actually really specific to my work as a contractor that you wouldn't find in a quote in a second sector. So the validity of my horizontal product, if I'm now a multi-vertical solution, to apply in construction is likely not very high. So as a horizontal player, I'm now in the position where I need to make a product decision. Is tailoring it to construction worthwhile? Or is it more
Hmm.
worthwhile using the product that I have and actually going to sector ABC first, right? That is not construction. And I think that's
Hmm.
what we're seeing in construction is that the sector is buying itself a lot of time due to this very specific function that I just mentioned, so that actually inherent verticalized players from construction find a big enough market and grow from the grassroots up. And my thesis is that that time is actually still another 1, 2, 3, 4 years ongoing. And
Yeah.
I would expect that should allow the verticalized players in almost all of the workflows, all of the functions within construction SMBs to build out a pretty core position. It's going to be interesting for sure to see how it plays out, but that's my thesis.
Yeah, it's actually, it's fascinating. So a lot of the multi-vertical or horizontal SMB enablement platforms that we come across, construction does continue to be very underrepresented. Now, and I guess we have heard different sets of feedback on why that may be the case. For instance, one set of feedback suggests that construction is likely to never get the kind of love from these platforms for some of the reasons we've discussed. Another opinion is, hey, they'll eventually get to it, as I'm sure every founder claims, right? But then it's very difficult, and therefore, may come or may not come. We don't yet know. But there's a picture being painted
Right.
at this point.
So let's maybe use an example from expense management, right? So
Hmm.
this is actually not a real example from a company. This is more a hypothetical. So don't go out and Google it because you probably won't find this exact example. Okay, but so let's take expense management on the one hand side. You have a platform like Brex that is giving out virtual credit cards to SMBs and other sectors, and putting an expense management and accounting support platform below it. And then you have a verticalized solution that maybe only serves construction tech. There are a few, but the example I'm going to use is hypothetical. So let's now say you're a contractor that has a lot of rotating stuff, right?
Hmm.
So you're maybe an owner-led SMB, and you have freelance staff on project A, freelance staff on project B. You're owning the expense management platform. So is Brex now in the position to actually give out virtual credit cards to rotating staff to this very specific use case within construction tech? I'm not sure they can do that.
Probably not.
So how do you manage that it's safe? How do you manage that it's easily issued, that it's easily retracted, etc., while the owner is actually not at the desk because the owner is in the field himself or herself, also overseeing the project, right? So that's an
Yeah.
example for a very construction specific use case that I think the horizontal platforms will need to do product development in order to offer that, which no doubt, I mean, from an engineering perspective, they can do that. But is
Yeah.
that worth the engineering hours and the management attention? Or is it better used for them in another sector that fits the product that they already have? And I think that's what we're looking at with regard to the horizontals versus verticals,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. It'll be fascinating to see how this plays out. I guess we're now probably only in the first generation of these enablement firms tackling SMBs.
I mean, one other workflow, for example, is HR. Have you thought about would a horizontal HR solution win or more like a vertical HR solution?
So I would say, from an HR perspective, or to broaden it a bit, combining HR and payroll,
Hmm.
that's a function where I think a construction-specific solution makes a ton of sense.
Hmm.
Because the kind of work done, the kind of employment relationship that a typical worker in construction would have, in other words, it would be mostly a gig worker, or the distinction between a gig worker and a full-time worker is very pronounced in construction, and even the concept of shift-based work, hourly work, etc.,
Right.
is very pronounced. Which is why I think unless a platform is designed from the ground up to incorporate these features, it's a bit much to expect an HR and payroll system designed for a more white collar friendly system to just add these features as they go along, because a lot of it needs to be designed from the ground up, embracing the requirements of the construction industry.
Right. And then I mean a few other aspects about construction that feed into what you're saying is also workers' compensation, insurance.
Yeah,
How do you
that's
manage
right.
that? The whole safety and compliance, compliance with safety around that in order to comply with insurance. I think that's again I think something that is really specific,
Yeah,
and where the market is deep enough for a vertical player, in my opinion, as well. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
And there are terrific companies out there that are serving that too.
absolutely.
All right, so let's go to the third segment of today's topic around SMB superpowers,
Hmm.
Shub. So we wondered for the third and final question here. Let's talk specifically about the roles of wholesalers or distributors within construction. And throwing this question over to you here, what do you think is the role of a distributor slash wholesaler in the topic of SMB enablement within construction? and technology?
So I'd say the role played varies a bit, both in terms of the extent of coverage as well as, I would say, macro level importance, depending on the kind of market we're discussing. So let's say if I come at it more from a emerging market perspective, distributors in general have tended to have more of a coverage, or more coverage in what we would call tier one or metropolitan cities,
Hmm.
and maybe not as much coverage in the non-tier one markets, right? And therefore, when we talk about how important distributors and wholesalers are, there is that level of nuance. With that being said, they are very, very important in metropolitan markets, and in certain non-metropolitan markets also, although also maybe the only way to get into a market, even if it is at suboptimal scale.
Hmm.
Um, I therefore think, you know, either one of the two approaches is therefore maybe only seeing a limited view of the market. And by two approaches, what I mean is an approach which says, hey, distributors are unnecessary, right? And therefore we completely disintermediate them. We take, their place in the market,
Yeah, good line.
or to say, hey, everything goes via the distributor, and therefore we facilitate that channel. So I think at least in emerging markets, and perhaps to a lesser extent too in other markets, the way I see it, I see an equilibrium where two different sets of models will eventually take root and win. So
Hmm.
one is basically markets and use cases where distributors are perhaps not that important, or perhaps on shaky ground to begin with, which is where you'll see models which is where mostly full stack models prove themselves out, and that's where they come in and really gain market share, where they either play the role that a distributor would play in a conventional markets context, or they go even deeper than that. The other, and you'll also have a different set of models where distributors are indeed playing a very important and wholesome role in the market to kind of empower that exchange between distributors and the suppliers and the eventual demand side customers. So that's my view. Basically, two sets of models. But as you can imagine, in one of these two sets, the distributor continues to play an important role, and perhaps the distributor's role needs to even be emphasized even more for the market as a whole to benefit.
Hmm. And is there a specific condition in the market that you think needs to be there for the one or the other avenue that you just mentioned to be better suited?
So I would say, if let's say there's an abundance of supply, and for some reason it's not, and there is an awareness that there could be more demand available, but it is very hard to actually get to the demand. It could be because the ground realities of the market is the enabling infrastructure, be it logistics, be it customer access, etc., is difficult to achieve. That is, let's say, a
Hmm.
very classic context in which you would need a very specialized distributor to come in and specifically solve for that problem statement. I would say that could be a use case where a distributor plays a role.
Hmm.
The other, and I'm kind of hypothetically thinking of how and why a distributor would be needed, could be where there is sufficient ability to get to some demand, but a distributor is able to perhaps optimize for the right degree of matchmaking on price, to match demand and supply in an optimal way to extract the right price from the market. Uh, I would say that, at least in emerging markets, it is an important role, but perhaps not as critical of a role when it comes to the building materials industry, at least.
Hmm. Got it. So when I think about this question, the role of distributors in SMB enablement, um, I've developed a fairly strong thesis from an investor perspective over the last 1.5 years. In that, I think in mature markets, the distributors are here to stay. And the more I've seen of solutions for construction material purchases, construction warehousing, construction e-commerce solutions like Shopify for X, the more I've seen of that, the more I've realized how entrenched the role of the distributors in the mature markets actually is. And I'm going to put an asterisk to that because I want to also come briefly to Latin America and Africa, which are sort of a separate set of markets, but where the role of the distributors are quite interesting too. But so first, starting with the mature markets, so these distributors have been entrenched for 70 years or sometimes even longer because in the pre-digital era they fulfilled a critical function like warehousing, buffering supply with demand, and being able to fulfill faster than if you didn't have local warehouses, for example. So that's one function. And the other function, like you said, was aggregation of demand, right? So being a much more efficient sell-through channel for producers rather than having to acquire all these fragmented small customers in all the cities themselves. So that's historically the two functions that a distributor or wholesaler has fulfilled. And since they have developed that function through relationships in construction over the last decades, that's why they are entrenched, is the relationships that are there, right? And so again, I mean, the ground truth in construction SMBs working with your distributor is that the relationship is so strong. You know the first name of the guy you might or girl, you might have worked with her or him for the last 10, 12 years. And when you call, they know what you need, they know when you need it, they know the color of your pickup truck to pick it up, you know where the gate is. So essentially what is happening is this informal loyalty program between the construction SMB and the distributor, that when you call, you get first dibs on the inventory. And right now, the market conditions are as great for the distributors as ever because inventory gets sold out even if, before it hits the warehouse of the distributor. That's how dire the situation of material availability in the Western markets has become in the last year since COVID. So distributors were entrenched before COVID. Now they're even stronger due to their relationships, right? So in my book, any solution that tries to outright disintermediate the distributors is going to have a really hard time. And not to say that there couldn't be wins in that book. I'm just saying the market condition is not in your favor to do that. So I'm quite excited also about solutions that do distributor enablement, like Shopify for distributors is a theme that I find really interesting in construction tech in the mature markets. Real quick about Latin America and Africa. So there, what's interesting is you have these small hardware shops that are very local in small cities, 200 square meters of inventory. They might have a couple dozen or a couple hundred customers. They are known in their local communities. So there, a solution like our portfolio company Inframarket that directly sells to these small hardware shops also has sort of a distributor function, right? And so that's another thing in the Latin American, African markets that I find really interesting. And we cannot disclose it just yet, but we actually made an investment in what we think can become an infra market for Latin America. Very excited about that one, and that does exactly that partnership.
I couldn't echo your excitement with more enthusiasm, I have to say, about the Latin American firm.
Okay. Yeah, but what's your point about the let's say the role of the distributor in the mature markets? I know you cover the emerging markets for us, but do you have a different thesis about the mature markets?
So, if a similar question was posed to me in the emerging markets, I would, for instance, the starting thesis or thought would be, hey, how do we replace the distributor, and therefore, the thought process on which model to think of will go in a very different direction. What I find quite appealing in what in your response from the question we just discussed was the Shopify for distributors model, which, judging by what you said about how the role the distributors have played in mature markets and how that has evolved during and as a result of COVID, I think that will be a very fascinating model, and I'm very curious to see how that plays out, because it could very well be that uh, this is how you actually empower and make distributors more effective at doing what they're doing, and in a way which the other market participants it benefits them, and you allow everyone to more fully extract the supply, or the constraints to utilize their available assets to the max,
Right.
and you don't necessarily need to do it through a very ops heavy model, etc. You just need pieces of technology to connect the various stakeholders. So I find that quite appealing, and I think it'll be very interesting to see in the next year or so how the thesis plays out.
I agree, and I think part of our thesis around that Shopify for distributors is that a lot of the functionality that you offer has to do with sales enablement. So basically, helping the frontline sales guys, helping the sales guys that are sitting,
Mhm.
in the back office to actually do more sales, optimize the baskets, do upselling, do cross selling, sell more with less time, while actually nurturing and using the time that you free up to nurture actually the relationship, because that is the core asset of the distributor, and why actually the distributor is so hard to disintermediate. So the more time they can actually spend on top line, but also relationship nurturing through their sales staff, I think those solutions will find attention from the distributors. So if you're a founder building a solution like that for your market, I mean, come talk to us. We'll have a very fast discussion with you.
I would say if you're a founder building to solve any problem, or many of the problems faced by the SMBs in the construction industry, do talk to us, and I'm sure that's an enormous problem statement to solve for. So
Yeah,
very excited to see what the future has in store for us.
yeah. Thanks for that correction. You're right. Yes. All right. So Shub, we're coming to the end here. So maybe to briefly summarize, what's your takeaway from today's session?
So I would say, nothing really to change in terms of my overall excitement for what the future holds for SMBs in construction.
I'm glad.
I'd say there's interesting flavors and nuances on which models might be more exciting. Um, I would say I will give you the proverbial tip of the hat to acknowledge the fact that we perhaps may need even more specialization
Hmm.
for construction than I had otherwise uh, started off with as a thesis. Um, and I think it's not a coincidence that so many of the horizontal SMB enablement solutions don't really solve anything significant in construction just yet.
Right.
I don't think
Right.
that's a coincidence. That's probably by design.
Yeah, so my takeaways go in a similar direction. I think the time that the sector has in order to work out specific solutions until the horizontals um, find enough of a reason to go after construction and not after other sectors, we still might have a few months or years, even, and that should allow us to build a few unicorns in deep markets in SMB enablement and construction. First point. Second point for me, I think around specific workflows, functions that we can be excited about, accounting, expense management, HR, for sure, sales enablement, especially when you talk about distributors, and then also the topics that you mentioned around, logistics, dispatch solutions, fleet management. I think those are quite interesting as well, and I'm sure we're forgetting, workflows and functions here. So I think that's my second takeaway. And the third one is specifically the mature markets, but also LATAM, Africa, distributors, local retailers. They have a really strong position in SMB enablement due to the relationships that they have built over decades. So overall, couldn't be a better time to be building a SMB enablement technology solution for construction, I would say. Overall, great time.
100%.
Awesome, man. So many thanks again, dear viewers, for viewing in to our little rants here ongoing, talking today about the superpowers that SMBs in construction have. I'm looking forward to seeing you all next time. Thanks, Shub. Thanks, viewers.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, everyone.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.